It's Wednesday, 6 November. Look at that. We survived the U.S. election. Welcome to the President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. All right, let's get briefed. First, we'll look at the results of yesterday's presidential election, which saw former President Donald Trump secure the 270 electoral votes needed to be declared the 47th President of the United States. Later in the show, there's a major leadership shakeup happening in Israel, where Prime Minister Netanyahu just fired Defense Minister Yoav Gallant from his post in the midst of the ongoing war in Lebanon and Gaza. Netanyahu cited a loss of trust, punctuated by mounting public disagreements, as reasons for the sacking. Plus, we're learning that Israeli authorities recently raided the Prime Minister's office, which is reportedly the subject of a months-long probe regarding criminal incidents allegedly linked to wartime meetings. And in today's Back of the Brief, anxiety is running high inside the Iranian regime and the IRGC, oh, that's a good thing, over anticipation of potential new public protests against the regime's oppressive treatment of women. This follows the violent arrest of a female university student who stripped down to her underwear on campus Sunday to oppose the regime's mandatory hijab policy. All right, look, if there was a Nobel Prize for bravery, this girl would be the outright winner. But first, today's PDB Spotlight. After a barn burner of an election night, do people still say barn burner? We can now announce that Donald Trump will become the 47th President of the United States. It was an intense evening as results began to trickle in, but one with few early surprises. Trump won traditionally red states, such as Texas, Ohio, Kentucky, and Alabama, while Harris picked up early victories in solidly blue states, such as California, New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. No surprises there. Trump also won Florida by a solid and larger-than-expected 13-point margin, as well as Iowa, despite a last-minute poll over the weekend predicting that he was down in Iowa by 3 percentage points to Harris. Deeper into the evening, however, larger tallies began to come in regarding the critical swing states at play, which began trending toward Trump, but remained too close to call before 11 p.m. In the first major announcement of the evening, media outlets called the critical swing state of North Carolina for Trump shortly before 11:30 p.m. East Coast time. Shortly after that, the swing state of Georgia also ended up breaking for Trump. The final domino to fall was Pennsylvania, which was called just after 1 a.m. on the East Coast, ensuring that Trump secured the needed electoral margin to be declared the next president of the United States. With Trump outperforming his results from 2016, election experts of all stripes say his victory represents a remarkable political comeback following his loss in 2020. One network pundit described it as a phoenix rising from the ashes, and he wasn't wrong. While the tallies are not final, Trump is also ahead in the popular vote by some 3 percentage points. It's worth noting a Republican presidential candidate hasn't won the popular vote since former President George W. Bush in 2004. Now, this is just a snapshot of what was an incredibly eventful election night, and final tallies across all states are still trickling in, which will have implications for down-ballot races across the country. Turning to the fight over control of both houses of Congress, and this is very important, Republicans also managed to take control of the Senate from the Democrats with a slim majority. West Virginia Governor Jim Justice flipped a crucial Senate seat for Republicans in his state, while newcomer Bernie Moreno turned the tables in Ohio, taking a key Senate seat from incumbent Democrat Sherrod Brown. Deb Fischer pushed Republicans over the edge by holding onto her Senate seat in Nebraska against a strong independent challenger, putting the chamber squarely in the hands of Republicans. The situation with the House, with Congress, is less clear, but is providing Democrats with perhaps a little optimism on what was otherwise a depressing night. Still, it could go either way. A common theme of the night was the ground the Republicans made up when compared to 2020 regarding early voter turnout. As we discussed on yesterday's show, Republicans significantly increased their share of early voting this cycle, particularly in the swing states. This closing of the gap along with high voter turnout levels for Republicans on Election Day, appears to have created a perfect storm that pushed Trump over into victory. All right, coming up next, there's a major leadership shakeup happening in Israel, where Prime Minister Netanyahu just fired Defense Minister Yoav Gallant from his post, right in the middle of the ongoing war in Lebanon and Gaza. Plus, we're learning that Israeli authorities recently raided the office of the Prime Minister. Now, Netanyahu's office is reportedly the subject of a months-long probe regarding criminal incidents allegedly linked to wartime meetings. I'll have those stories when we come back. Welcome back to the PDB. I want to turn your attention to Israel, where Prime Minister Netanyahu has fired Defense Minister Yoav Gallant at a critical juncture for the country, as it contends with ongoing conflicts, of course, in Gaza, Lebanon, and an escalating back and forth with Iran. On Tuesday, Netanyahu handed Gallant his termination letter during a brief meeting. Now, the one-sentence letter informed Gallant that his term would end in 48 hours. One sentence. That's quite the dismissal letter. Gallant's firing follows a lengthy rift with Netanyahu, rooted in diverging visions for the war's direction. The two consistently clashed over Netanyahu's lack of a concrete plan for Gaza's long-term governance and his approach to releasing Israeli and foreign hostages held by Hamas. Notably, this is not the first time that Netanyahu attempted to remove Gallant. Back in March of 2023, he sought to fire him due to Gallant's opposition to Netanyahu's proposed judiciary overhaul. That decision was eventually rescinded after public outcry and concerns from the U.S., which called for Netanyahu to maintain a balanced approach in domestic policies. Gallant, a prominent advocate for a U.S.-backed ceasefire in Gaza, served as a key liaison with Washington, conducting close to 100 conversations with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin since the war's onset, acting as a stabilizing force in U.S.-Israel relations. His efforts helped manage tension over Israel's military actions, which often frustrated American officials. Gallant's departure stirred political tensions within Israel and sparked domestic unrest. Now, demonstrators quickly gathered in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, assembling outside Netanyahu's residence and Israel Defense Forces IDF headquarters to voice their opposition, according to Israel's Channel 12. In a statement released by his office, Netanyahu stated, quote, "In the past months, trust has been cracked between myself and the defense minister," end quote. His firing marks the end of a strained partnership within Israel's ruling Likud party. Gallant's exit will see Foreign Minister Israel Katz assume the defense portfolio, while former Netanyahu ally Gideon Sa'ar will step into Katz's role. Katz now faces the immediate challenge of steering Israel's military campaigns in Lebanon and Gaza. In Lebanon, Katz inherits a delicate situation, well, that's to say the least, as Hezbollah, though weakened, retains the capability to inflict severe damage if Israeli forces intensify their operations. In Gaza, Israeli troops continue to confront Hamas elements, which persist in key areas despite heavy losses. But Israel's confrontation with Iran looms as the most dangerous threat. Now, last month's strikes by Israel significantly impacted Iran's missile and air defense capabilities, and Tehran has vowed retaliation. Israel has pledged a decisive response to any new attacks, fueling fears, of course, of a broader conflict that could draw in the U.S. and Arab states. Gallant's firing may also be just the beginning of a larger upheaval within Israel's defense leadership. Sources close to Netanyahu suggest he's also eyeing the dismissal of the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, and Shin Bet Israel's security agency head, Ronen Bar. Gallant's sacking, with the potential for more to come, appears to reflect Netanyahu's intent to consolidate control, but risks deepening divisions within his administration, the Israeli public, and with Western allies. All right, sticking with Israel's internal situation, we're learning that the Office of Prime Minister Netanyahu has been the subject of a months-long investigation over alleged, quote, criminal incidents linked to wartime meetings. Israeli authorities disclosed the ongoing probe on Tuesday after a court partially lifted a gag order. The case reportedly centers on allegations that officials within the Prime Minister's office tampered with security protocols for cabinet meetings held during the war, while altering transcripts of security updates with key leaders, all in an apparent attempt to keep Netanyahu's conversations regarding the war in Gaza untraceable. That's according to a report from the Times of Israel. While the bulk of the details regarding the investigation remain under a gag order, officials say it has been ongoing now for at least 6 months. Netanyahu appeared to confirm the investigation is targeting his office on Tuesday, issuing a statement condemning the probe as a, quote, unprecedented hunting expedition against the Prime Minister's office in the midst of a war, end quote. We should note, the news of the investigation coincided with a report on Tuesday that Israeli authorities carried out an unprecedented raid of Netanyahu's office on Saturday night. It was not immediately clear if the raid was in connection with the probe or related to a separate investigation regarding leaks of classified intelligence by members of the Prime Minister's office, which we discussed on Monday's PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Reports in Israeli media say the investigation was triggered earlier this year after Netanyahu's former military secretary, Major General Avigal, alerted the Attorney General that officials inside the PM's office were attempting to tamper with some protocols and transcripts of classified meetings, including one concerning sensitive preparations for a significant diplomatic event. Gill had himself been approached by unnamed staffers within the PM's office who voiced concerns about the behavior. Around the same time, senior figures in the security establishment had raised fears that meeting minutes from the War Cabinet were being edited or otherwise altered, after noticing multiple discrepancies between meeting transcripts and what officials said that they heard in person. According to a report from Haaretz, Gill also warned that some War Cabinet sessions had been moved to the Prime Minister's office from the Defense Ministry's headquarters in Tel Aviv, where discussions there are typically recorded. The investigation is being spearheaded by Israel's Lahav 433 unit, which specializes in crimes related to public corruption. Investigators are reportedly furious over the public disclosure of the ongoing probe, fearing that it will undermine their work and lead to a large-scale witch hunt. Now, I want to stress again that Netanyahu's office has categorically denied any misconduct, calling the reports a, quote, complete lie. Officials close to Netanyahu also lamented what they called, quote, selective enforcement by Israeli authorities, noting that little has been done to stem the tide of leaks that have plagued Jerusalem's halls of power since the war began. In a statement, Netanyahu's office said, quote, after a year of a flood of criminal leaks from cabinet discussions and meetings about hostages and missing persons, which provided valuable intelligence to our enemies, the only 2 investigations that were opened targeted the Prime Minister's office rather than the wholesale leakers. As with previous attempts to inflate accusations against the Prime Minister and his circle, this too will amount to nothing, end quote. All right, up next in the back of the brief, fears are mounting within the Iranian regime's leadership that new rounds of public protests against the regime's oppressive treatment of women could soon break out, following the violent arrest of a female university student protesting the regime's mandatory hijab policy. I'll have the details after the break. In today's Back of the Brief, we turn to Iran, where a female college student was recently arrested after stripping to her underwear in a bold public protest after she was attacked by Basij, that's a paramilitary group under Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, for failing to comply with the regime's mandatory hijab rules. Videos of the protest circulating on social media, which took place at Tehran's Islamic Azad University on Sunday, show her gesturing to peers also wearing headscarves before walking with her hair exposed in clear defiance of Iran's enforced dress code. Another video reveals her walking down a campus road until a group of men gather around her, push her into a car, and drive her away. Amnesty International condemned the, quote, violent arrest, describing it as part of Iran's, quote, abusive enforcement of hijab laws. The student's defiance adds to a growing movement against the so-called morality laws in Iran, where women face mandatory public hijab laws and harsh punishment for defiance. The movement surged in 2022 after Mahsa Amini died in police custody following her arrest for allegedly wearing her hijab improperly, sparking protests across Iran that led many women to remove headscarves in solidarity. The theocratic regime responded with a violent crackdown on the protesters that left hundreds dead. Amir Kabir, an Iranian student news outlet, reported Basij members previously harassed the student on campus, tearing her headscarf and clothes. Witnesses say members of Basij, which is a U.S.-designated terrorist organization, beat her severely, with some stating her head was slammed into a car, leaving blood on its tires. Unsurprisingly, Fars, an Iranian state-run news agency, countered this, claiming the student disrobed after security officers, quote, calmly talked to her about her appearance. Calmly talked to her. Yeah, what an entire truckload of crap. Where exactly are all the feminists, by the way, and campus protesters in places like the U.S.? Why is it that this incident doesn't matter to them? The Iran University's public relations director confirmed the student's arrest, labeling her actions as, quote, indecent, stating she was handed over to law enforcement. The incident quickly drew global attention. United Nations independent investigator Mai Sato announced she would closely monitor the situation. Ooh, well, she's going to closely monitor this. That will definitely make a difference. Oh, and a U.S.-based Iranian-American lawyer urged international leaders to speak out. Don't hold your breath. Iranian-American activist Masih Alinejad took to social media, calling for solidarity and describing the protest as a, quote, powerful stand against a regime that constantly controls women's bodies. Amnesty International has demanded her immediate release, calling for access to her family, a lawyer, and urging impartial investigations into, quote, allegations of beatings and sexual violence. Inside Iran, the incident is reportedly fueling concerns among senior officials that the regime could soon face a new round of public protests against their oppressive treatment of women, much like the demonstrations in 2022. Well, one can only hope. Though Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian pledged to end morality police patrols after his election in July, critics see his words as mere lip service. Just last month, Iran's Guardian Council reinforced the hijab and chastity bill, introducing fines for violators. And at the end of the day, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei retains ultimate legislative control. Oh, and by the way, there is nothing moderate about the Iranian president. Talk about how Masoud Pezeshkian was some kind of moderate was simply Western appeasers of the Iranian regime, mirroring their hopes and unrealistic dreams on the Iranian president. He's a toady of the Supreme Leader. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Wednesday, 6 November. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And as you may have been hearing during the U.S. election coverage on all the national networks, you can listen to the PDB ad-free simply by becoming a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. I'm Mike Baker. I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.